Hello everybody, how you doing? This is Mr. Dowse, and in today's lesson I'm going to discuss how to find slope or slope of a line using the slope formula. The slope formula is this equation right here. And remember that m is the letter in the alphabet that represents slope. And then we have m equals y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1. Now, whenever you're finding slope of a line or the slope between 2 points, you're always going to have two different sets of coordinates, which is why we have two x's and two y's here. And to explain that, let's see here. For r, I go back 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and down 2. That's a -6, -2. And if I look at s, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, up 3. And if I were to label this with x and y instead, so we have an x and a y, an x and a y, I have two x values and two y values. That's where these two x2 y2 minus y1 and x2 minus x1 come into play. So we're comparing two different locations here. Now the y's are the change in the y values here, and then the bottom is the change in the x values. So we're going to end up comparing these numbers to find the slope. But there's a problem here. I've got 2's and 1's here. I don't have 2's and 1's here. So you need to pick one of the coordinates to be x1 and y1, and then the other coordinate's going to be x2 and y2. So r comes first from left to right, so I always label what comes first from left to right as x1 and y1. And then s is second from left to right, so I'm going to call this x2 and y2. Now, I could, if I wanted to, I could have called this x2 and y2 and x1 and y1. But whenever we're talking about one specific point, the numbers on the bottom need to match up. So this is x2, this has to be y2. I can't say this is x2 and y1, that's bad. You've got to have the same number here to indicate that this is the same coordinate. So ultimately what's going to happen here, we're going to end up comparing one set of coordinates to the other set of coordinates. And that's going to get us the slope between these 2 points. So in this case here, r was the x2 and y2, and s is the y1 and the x2. But again, we could have swapped these around. It's not going to matter. You're going to get the same answer no matter what. But let's move on here. Let's solve a problem here. How do you do it? I tell my students there are 4 steps, and if you follow these 4 steps on trying to find slope between 2 points using the slope formula, then you should get the right answer, assuming you get all the math right in the process as well. So let's solve example 1, and I'll apply these steps to it. Find the slope of segment AB if A is at a -2.7 and B is at a 4.3 using the slope formula. Now this is forcing you to use this slope formula here. But I want you to understand there is another way of finding slope. There's a way using something called rise over run, and this is the method that I prefer to use. But from time to time, your teacher might ask you to use the slope formula, or it just might make more sense to use the slope formula. I have students who prefer the slope formula over a rise over run. And so, but anyways, there is a separate video that you might want to watch to help you understand this in a different way. But the first step here says write down the slope formula. So I'm going to copy what I have here. M equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. And so that's the first step here. Step 2 says label the coordinates x1, x2, y1, and y2. So what we have here is we have x1 and y1. I'm calling this x1 and y1 because it came first when I was reading this. So A is first, so x1 and y1. B is going to be second, and I'm going to call this x2 and y2. That's the second step here. Step 3 says substitute values of x1, x2, y1, and y2 into the slope formula. So let's start plugging these numbers in. x2 is 3. Now there's a subtract sign here, so I'm going to put a subtract sign here. Then let's move on to y1, which is 7. And then we have x2 is 4. And then we have this subtract sign in the equation, so I've got to put subtract sign here. And then x1 becomes the -2. And so I just substitute these values in. Now, if you are rushing through this, or you're not labeling here, you might make a simple mistake. A lot of my students will get to this point here, and they would have forgotten one of these negative signs. I have a subtract sign here, so I'm going to have a subtract sign here. I have a subtract sign here, so I'm going to have a subtract sign here. You're always going to have a subtract sign in here first. Sometimes, though, you're going to have a negative number after it, and then you're going to end up having two negatives make a positive. So this equation, in this case, is going to be a 3 minus 7 divided by a 4 plus 2. So be careful here. Don't rush these problems here, because if you forgot to put in a negative sign here, you're going to get the wrong answer. Step 4 says to solve the problem, so let's do that. 3 minus 7 is a negative 4. A 4 plus 2 is 6, so I've solved the problem, but now I need to simplify the fraction if necessary. Now, 4 and 6, these are both even numbers, so I can divide both of these by 2. And I can reduce this down to a negative 2 over 3. And so the slope between these 2 points, A and B, is a negative 2 over 3. And now I'm done. Now sometimes you can't reduce this. So if this was like a negative 4 and a 5, this would have stayed a negative 4 over 5 because you can't reduce those. But negative 4 over 6 can be reduced. If you are, this is another spot where some of my students, they don't quite finish it. They think this guy's the answer, and if you're to solve it and leave it like this, I would take points off because you always want to reduce the fraction down as much as possible. It just matters in math. You always want to reduce things down if you can. Let's do one more problem, then we'll call it quits on this video. Same steps, but I've changed the locations of these points. Find the slope of segment FG if f is at 9,6 and g is at a negative 5,1 using the slope formula. Now again, I'm forcing you to solve it using the slope formula, so we're going to use this guy here instead of the rise over run. Let's see here. So write down the slope formula. So I'm going to go m equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Now label the coordinates x1, x2, y1, and y2. So let's go with x1, y1. Again, they came first from left to right, so I'm going to label f as x1 and y1. G comes second, so I'm calling it x2 and y2. And so I've labeled the coordinates. Now substitute the values of x1, x2, y1, and y2 into the equation. So let's do that here. So m equals y2 is 1. Subtract. Y1 is 6. Then we have x2 is a negative 5. And then we have the subtract sign. And then we have x1 is 9. And there's no double negatives here, so I don't have to worry about double negatives becoming a positive. I'm going to now move on to solving the problem here. Well, what's 1 minus 6? That's negative 5. And then a negative 5 minus 9 is a negative 14. So I've solved the problem. Can I simplify it at all? Well, two negatives make it a positive. So this is actually going from negative to a positive slope. But I can't reduce 5 into 14, or 14. I can't reduce either of these anymore. So this is going to stay 5 over 14. And you really don't need the positive sign here. So the slope between points F and G is a positive 5 over 4. And so keep in mind here, two negatives make it a positive. So hopefully this helps you understand how to find the slope between 2 points using the slope formula. Again, I have another equation or another video that explains how to find slope between 2 points using rise over run. And I would highly recommend going to watch that video right now if you get a chance. So anyways, hope you have a good day. Bye-bye.